was saying that I also participate on the WEC Physical Security Working Group. I also am a voting member of the NERC CIPC, and I was honored to be one of 11 persons on the CIP-014 Standard drafting team. I'm also participating with NATF as the team lead for creating an R5 guideline, and in my spare time I'm also an ASIS International Council Vice President. There's been a lot of buzz since the standard was voted on in August, and as a matter of fact, EEI and NATF are hosting a CIP-014 implementation workshop tomorrow here in Denver, Colorado. So there was one earlier this year, I think it was last month, in Charlotte, and if you didn't attend that, hopefully for those that are interested and have the budget, you may be attending the one in Denver tomorrow. But today we're going to be focusing just on the R4 and R5 third-party review without going over the entire standard. So we're going to briefly touch on the R4 requirements and the R5 requirements because that's what the third-party review is for, and then we'll dive a little deeper into the R6 requirements. So, R4 requirements from the FERC order, it's stated in the second step, the reliability standards should require owners or operators of the identified critical facilities to evaluate the potential threats and vulnerabilities to those identified facilities. The threats and vulnerabilities may vary from facility to facility based on factors such as the facility's location, size, function, existing protections, and attractiveness as a target. Thus, the reliability standards should require the owners or operators to tailor their evaluation to the unique characteristics of the identified critical facilities and the type of attacks that can be realistically contemplated. NERC should also consider in the standards development process requiring owners and operators to consult with entities with appropriate expertise as part of this evaluation process. So that's what the FERC order said, and one of the charters of the standard drafting team was to address each of the items in the FERC order as best we could, providing maximum flexibility to the asset owners. So R4 in the standard stated, shall conduct an evaluation of the potential threats and vulnerabilities of a physical attack to each of their respective transmission stations, substations, and primary control centers identified in requirement R1. So, and these are three of the subcomponents of that, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. So again, unique characteristics of the organization of the facility, prior history of attack, and intelligence or threat warnings. So you can see how each of these items tried to address number 8 in the FERC order, requiring a threat and vulnerability assessment to be conducted. So, and the last step, where entities with appropriate expertise as part of the evaluation process, is 4.3, which is intelligence or threat warnings from different organizations. Most of our organizations, especially those that have security professionals on staff, are able to identify their own vulnerabilities. But we need to look outside the organization for our threat or intelligence warnings. And some of those are listed here: law enforcement, ERO, ES ISAC, and U.S. and Canadian government. And so that includes, the FBI, state fusion centers, and those different organizations, so that you can tie that piece together for a complete threat and vulnerability assessment. So then looking at R5 requirements, in the FERC order, it's stated in Section 9, third and finally, the reliability standards should require those owners or operators of critical facilities to develop and implement a security plan designed to protect against attack to those identified critical facilities based on the assessment of the potential threats and vulnerabilities to their physical security. The reliability standards themselves need not dictate specific steps an entity must take to protect against attacks on the identified facilities. And many of the comments during the voting process identified that we should have been more prescriptive, perhaps, in what was required, but the drafting team felt that the FERC order addressed it very well in that they didn't have to be prescriptive. Continuing, however, the reliability standards need to require that owners or operators of identified critical facilities have a plan that results in an adequate level of protection against the potential physical threats and vulnerabilities they face at the identified critical facilities. So, requirement 5 on the standards states, shall develop and implement a documented physical security plan that covers their respective transmission stations, substations, and primary control centers, and that will be completed with 120 calendar days after the completion of requirement R2. So instead of being prescriptive, the drafting team felt that we should embody the concept of protection in depth, or layered security, and by definition in the physical security guideline produced by NERC a couple years ago, that includes deter, detect, delay, assess, communicate, and respond. So that's how we felt that we could take what the FERC wanted and leave flexibility for the asset owner to be able to mitigate the threats and vulnerabilities in their own context and using their best resources. And that also includes law enforcement contact in 5.2. 5.3 was a timeline for executing the physical plan, so that it wasn't just an open-ended 10-year project that you're going to upgrade this. And then also provisions to evaluate evolving threats. And that was also in the FERC order further down. So we've covered R4 and R5, and so let's get into R6, the third-party review in what the primary purpose of this webinar today. So, from the FERC order, paragraph 11, it stated, similarly, the determination of threats and vulnerabilities and the security plan should also be reviewed by NERC, the relevant regional entity, the reliability coordinator, or another entity with appropriate experience. So, requirement 6 states in the standard, shall have an unaffiliated third-party review the evaluation performed under requirement R4, which is the threat and vulnerability assessment, and the security plans developed under requirement R5. So we were very specific about the unaffiliated third party so that another department in the same company would not fulfill that, because we didn't believe that was the intent of the FERC order. So it's unaffiliated third party review. So we do want to point out that the review may occur concurrently with or after completion of R4 and the R5 plan, and the review is completed within 90 days. So and then if the reviewer decides that your plan should be modified, there's a mechanism for doing that. So you either modify the plan or document reasons for not modifying, and then also requirement 6 also has a section regarding protecting the information. So let's look at R6 a little closer on the third-party qualifications. So the number one criteria is electric industry physical security experience. And so in the FERC order, it stated relevant and appropriate expertise. So the drafting team felt that it was very, very important that, number one, they have physical security expertise, but also electric industry expertise as well. They need those two to go together to be able to adequately and correctly evaluate plans created for substations and control centers. So as those security professionals that are online well know, that if a person has 30 plus years in the retail industry, they may be great in that sector, but not necessarily valuable in the electric sector. So this is a common thread throughout the sub-requirements, that the third-party reviewer have electric industry and physical security expertise. And as the slide shows, the drafting team thought this was the most important element, because those electric substations are uniquely different. Control centers, not necessarily so much, because say, for instance, a control center in a telecommunications company and an electric generation and transmission organization, you know, are pretty much the same. They're in a building and they're controlled. So, moving down to the first subsection of 6.1 of the CIP-014 standard, it says an entity or organization with an electric industry physical security experience and whose review staff has at least one member who holds either a CPP or PSP certification. So, there were many certifications bounced around, and we looked at all of those, and they looked at the requirements. And for those that don't necessarily know about the CPP or the PSP, I put up here on this slide those qualifications as a guideline. You'll see that especially in your PSP, it's in physical security. And there's 3 different domains. I believe one is security hardware, another is the contracting process, and another is the assessment process. The CPP has 8 different domains, and one of those is in physical security. But again, it's not just someone with one or both of these certifications. They also must demonstrate electric industry physical security experience. So then the second one is an entity or organization approved by the ERO. And so in our definition, you can see that here it's the ERO equals NERC equals the regional entities as well. And so a third-party reviewer could be one of the regional entities. I don't necessarily know at this time that NERC is going to be in the business of being a third-party reviewer, but through the CIPC, we have been creating guidelines for NERC to follow in approving an organization that may be submitted to them. It was also suggested that perhaps there would be a short list of approved vendors, but the general feeling right now is that that's not really the role of the ERO to approve vendors in advance. It would be better to do it by exception, in that if you're an asset owner and you don't know if who you're selecting as your third-party reviewer would be approved, you would submit that to your ERO, again, whether it's NERC or a regional entity, and they would look at their electric industry physical security experience and see if they would qualify. And again, if you fall into any one of these four categories that are a subcategory under 6.1, you don't need to go to the ERO to get their approval. So if you have selected someone with electric industry physical security experience and whose review staff has at least one of those two certifications, you don't need ERO's approval. You already meet the standard as it's spelled out here. So, some of the things that the ERO is going to be considering when approving an entity that's been submitted to them will be, again, their experience. Do they have other certifications? Let's say, for instance, in CEPTAD, or perhaps they have an engineering certifications. That would be very helpful as well. Qualifications of the review staff, other related experience that could be helpful, and the length and depth of experience. If your review person has 2 years experience, that may not necessarily be enough, but some of this I'm sure will be subjective and some will be objective. So then the next subsection in the standard states a governmental agency with physical security expertise. So during this discussion on the drafting team, we wanted to be clear that, and not exclude organizations that other electric entities have already used in the past to assist them with their physical security programs. So some of those examples of governmental agency would be your Department of Homeland Security Protective Security Advisor. In some states, those folks have gone out and conducted assessments, and so they may or may not look at your threat and vulnerability assessment and your security plan and give it a written assessment. That might be a problem. Some of the government agencies that I've worked with in the past will come and tell you what you can do, but they don't necessarily want to provide a written report. So for auditing purposes, typically if an auditor can't see it, it didn't happen. So you'll need some kind of documentation for that. And then Secret Service. So the protective side of the Secret Service, can do a pretty good job in doing assessments, and so we wanted to leave it open for a Secret Service person with physical security expertise could also render an opinion. So then the last part of that section is from the standard stated an entity or organization with demonstrated law enforcement, government, or military physical security expertise. So again, the drafting team, we heard dozens of recommendations, and so many different levels of agencies have been conducting assessments for the electric industry for actually quite some time. So on my slide here, I'm showing some of those: your local, county, or state law enforcement, if they're qualified. And those can be at all levels, especially, some state agencies fall in there. Also, other county and state government agencies, if they're qualified, or state and federal military agencies, if qualified. Here in Colorado, in the past, they've had a team from the National Guard. They would come out and do assessments for a whole host of critical infrastructure. And I know that several electric sector partners in the state have taken them up on their offer. They've been called the Rubicon team, and I don't know what. It seems like every few years they change their name. And so we're sure that other state or federal military agencies that have the experience but don't necessarily have the certifications would be able to adequately conduct a third-party review. And then another entity or organization includes individuals with experience. An example, former special forces or, Navy SEALs could actually do that if they've can show a demonstrated electric industry physical security experience. So that runs down the different parts of the standard 6.1. So before we sum it up, though, I want to highlight that the 6.2 says the transmission owner or operator shall ensure the unaffiliated third-party review is completed within 90 calendar days. Now, in some of the comments during the voting process, it said that 90 days is pretty short. Well, and we agreed, it was short. It was aggressive, but let's say, for instance, if the standard is approved by FERC by the end of the year, we're looking at a July 1st, 2015 implementation date. So it would be a good time to start lining up your third-party reviewer now, or between now and July 1st, than to start doing this July 1st. Because yes, if you started at July 1, you're probably going to be behind the power curve. So our suggestion would be to start developing those now. And then 6.3 says that if the unaffiliated third-party reviewer recommends changes, then you have one or two options, and either modify the evaluation consistent with the recommendation, or document the reasons for not modifying it. So whenever the auditors come, they'll be looking to see if you've done one or the other. And there is no arbitration process built in. You get to either do one or the other. So I think we talked about early on that you may want to coordinate your threat and vulnerability assessment and the security plan and your reviewing all together. Also, the reviewer has 60 days to complete the third-party review. So let's go back to 6.1 and expand a little bit more, so that other questions that I've had in other venues is that there's a whole host of ways that you can have the third-party review conducted. So you can have a government entity, you could have a law enforcement entity, you could hire a third-party contractor or vendor that's experienced in the industry, and there's a host of those that are out there. There's a number of organizations and individuals that have been providing assistance to the electric sector, especially in the physical security departments, for a number of years, and so they would be highly qualified to be able to do this. And then also, it could be through a peer process. so that if you had a reciprocal agreement with a peer company, then you could do this if they fit these requirements, especially if that person doing the review is a CPP or a PSP. Of course, in the discussions that I've heard, that some organizations would like to do this, but their legal staff has brought themselves in and said that they don't want the liability. So those types of issues will need to be worked out, of course. And the last item on 6.4 in that section is that each transmission owner and operator will implement procedures such as NDAs for protecting sensitive or confidential information made available to unaffiliated third-party reviewers. So, again on that, it went back and forth on how we could satisfy the FERC order that also stated that this information would be protected. One of the recommendations was to write in there that this should be exempt from freedom of information. Well, those are state and federal laws, and so you can't put that in a NERC standard because it wouldn't do anything. And so the way it's written provides flexibility for organizations to protect the information as they see fit. And one of the guidelines that was put in is that perhaps to not release any information off-site, so that if a third-party reviewer comes in and they would look at the information at the work site, and then they wouldn't take anything back to their organizations. So there's a number of ways to do it, and I'm sure that the legal departments in each of the asset owner organizations could be very helpful. So in summary, there are many ways to arrive at the same endpoint, and third-party assessments need not cost a small fortune. Consider the same entity for R4 and R5 so that you can so that your timelines can be met between the 90-day and the 60 days. And then the standards were developed for maximum flexibility to the asset owners and still complying with the FERC order. So that concludes my presentation for today. So we're going to open it up for questions. And again, I would like to remind those, maybe someone that arrived late, that there's a CIP-014 implementation workshop tomorrow in Denver, Colorado. It's out near the airport. It's being hosted by NATF and EEI, and so that could be a great forum for those that want to discuss this more with their peers. I don't know how many have registered for that, but I will be attending, and so I would be more than happy to answer any questions there or talk more about the development process and what the standards drafting team was looking at.
Allan, we have a couple of questions for you when you're ready.
Okay, so why don't we go to that now?
Okay. Well, just as a reminder, everyone, please enter your questions in the chat box. The first question we have is, does the third-party assessor need to physically inspect the sites, or can they merely review the written documentation and the written plan once a security plan has been reviewed or approved by a third-party assessor?
Well, that's a good question, and if you read the standard, you know, it says that third-party review, and so they're only reviewing the threat and vulnerability assessment and the plan. They're not assessing the site itself. Now, part of your plan will have or should have a site diagram of the facility and what you're installing at the facility. So the reviewer will see what types of mitigation strategies you are deploying, and as a reminder, the mitigation strategies must correlate to the threats and vulnerabilities identified in R4. And if you'll look at the RSAWs, they say the same thing. So an example would be you have a threat from sniper fire because there's a hill that's 50 yards away. So you would need a mitigation strategy in your physical security plan that would mitigate that specific threat, and they need to tie together so that you can't just have a TVA all by itself over here on its side, and then you throw a whole bunch of technology into a facility and thinking that, yes, you get it layered, but you haven't correlated to the threat and vulnerability. So to follow that up and sum it up is the third-party reviewer is reviewing the TVA and the security plan. Next question.
The next question is, what's the frequency that one should implement a third-party assessor for another review?
Well, the FERC order did say that there would be a periodicity of review. And if we go back to R1, it said that subsequent risk assessments shall be performed, and these risk assessments in R1 are really transmission analysis. We use the same verbiage that the FERC order had, which is a risk assessment, but R1 really is a transmission analysis. And so for entities that did the review the first time and have assets that need to be protected according to CIP-014, they have to review they have to conduct another transmission analysis every 30 calendar months. And then that sets off the triggers for everything else in the standard. So you follow the same timeline. So when modifying your physical security plans and TVA would be on a 30 calendar month schedule for those entities that fall under CIP-014 for its entirety, and then for those that had no assets identified, they have to do a transmission analysis every 60 calendar months. And so if you still come up after 60 calendar months and you don't have any assets that are affected, of course you're not doing a TVA or a physical security plan. But again, so in reviewing those plans and TVAs, it would be every 30 months for those that have control centers and substations that are protected under CIP-014. Next question.
This next question is, are there minimal written standards for the qualifications that a third-party vendor should have for transmission owners?
Could you state it again?
They're asking, are there minimal qualifications for third-party vendors that transmission owners should adhere to when hiring third-party vendors?
Well, there are none other than what's in the standard itself, which again, 6.1 has 4 different types of organizations and entities or persons. So again, that would be someone with electric industry physical security experience and has a CPP or a PSP, or someone that's approved by the ERO. In other words, you've submitted your organization to them that you want to use, and so they'll say yes or no, and then we discussed on how they're going to be evaluating those. A governmental agency with physical security expertise, and an organization with demonstrated law enforcement, government, or military physical security expertise. There are no other qualifications in writing other than those. Now, again, NATF is creating a guideline for its members. So if you're part of that, then you'll have guidelines on how to select a third-party reviewer if you need help. NERC CIPC is looking at working with NATF so that its members can be able to share that kinds of information as well. So there are guidelines coming out in the future, and I know that EEI, NATF, and NERC are all going to have a number of different outreach opportunities between now and the implementation date. Next question.
Do you have a latest guess for FERC finalizing the standard and approximate CIP-014 effective date?
The word on the street since the comment period ended mid-September is that by the end of the year they will finalize their order, and that will be out by the end of the year. And if you look at the implementation paragraph that's in the standard itself, which is trying to find out the page so that we can quote from it. But effective date is number 5, which is on page 5. Says it's effective the first day of the first calendar quarter. That's 6 months beyond the date that this standard is approved by applicable regulatory authorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So best guess is July 1, 2015.
And follow up to that, they want to ask you, why do you think it's taking so long?
Well, if you remember from the FERC NOPR, they also wanted comments on a number of different issues. So I know one was on the expanding the scope to include generation facilities. They wanted comments on a study for NERC to do, and then they also wanted NERC to include in the standard a process for for FERC or its similar Canadian governmental agency to be able to add or remove assets from the pool, and then remove the word widespread. So there's a number of issues that are floating around there, and they want to get it right the first time. And also this has high visibility, so I think it's not indicative of anything, but it's just the governmental process at work, and they want to get it right the first time because of the visibility. Next question.
Well, Alan, that concludes the questions for the day. We don't have any more from the field, but we just wanted to say thank you for taking your time to give us your great insight and information. And everyone, this will also be available. You'll receive an email, and we'll send you a recording of this as well. Alan, again, thank you again for your time. And if anyone would like more information about RiskWatch, just please contact us directly at riskwatch.com. My name is Victor Garlington with RiskWatch. Everyone have a great afternoon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.